next your session, the session in which you're involved. And let me assert that aspiration comes in two quite different ways into the evaluation of capability. One is to lead a life of aspiration as opposed to one of dejection. Itself has some value, and not just because it makes you happier. And secondly, aspiration, whether or not it can be seen as a capability in itself, is also very helpful for the achievement of other capabilities. In fact, the PhD thesis of Carolyn Nehartu, which I examined, was very much concerned with exactly, I don't know whether she is
on our panel.
she's somewhere, yeah. And so, and that's really very important. So I think on that, I could elaborate on that a bit more, because aspiration has been one of the things that in the development literature, going back to my earlier work before I ever thought about a word called capability or what significance might be, discuss those issues, how people's ability to take part in any kind of activity is dependent on wishing to do that. I mean, there has to be some kind of a desire and some sense of desire. I mean, the dejection, which is my main criticism of utilitarianism, that when you get reconciled to leading a life of deprivation, it may take the form of utilitarian dejection, in this case utilitarian snooping, but even if it's not that this form, you come to be at peace because you don't have many aspirations. The society has taken it out of you. And that is still a very big difference, and that's one respect, I think, the capability that puts us something to offer. Now, I think on that point I accept we don't probably have much of disagreement. On the second point, about what is the theory of justice about, I think that is a point of importance. I think, it's much clearer for me it's easier for me to explain where I disagree with in some way, my guru, in the sense he influenced me. I got into this subject because of John Locke. Namely, the idea that the task of the theory of justice is to identify what just societies are, and essentially perfectly just societies, because there's no other category that's admitted in that. And if you think about justice as fairness, which I was privileged to be involved in a class that Ken Arrow, Jack Rose, and I taught in 68, 69, where we read these chapters one by one. And so it was quite clear that we were characterizing a perfectly just society. And it seemed to me that many issues are not that kind at all. And a fairly easy mathematical point is that even if you agree on what a perfectly just society is, how to rank the failure to reach there, below that, could be quite different. You could have A, B, C, you could have A, C, B, and many other alternatives, and yet the fact that you agree on A doesn't mean that you agree on B being above C or C being above A. So that seems to be leaving the job to some extent half done. And the opposite is also true. We may not agree on what a perfectly just society is, and that's why I give examples of the kind that when people agree that slavery has to be abolished right now, they didn't necessarily agree on what would be an ideal society. And there would be all kinds of differences of opinion on that. So I think that is a point of some considerable importance, and to the extent that my theory focuses on, I think, in her joint book, Reiko Goto, who I think is also somewhere here, emphasizes that the critical aspect of my thinking is to look for patent injustice. Patent in the sense that people would come to agree on the basis of agreement here and now that could be achieved. Now that doesn't prevent us from having, think of a different view of an ideal society. I may have, you may have. But that did not, the fact that we have these disagreements and that these views of ideal society will undoubtedly affect many of our thinking, that does not prevent us from having a theory of justice which is concerned with judging whether justice is reduced or increased by certain steps. You might think that there's a little bit of economic way of thinking about it, and there is, but certainly a social choice way of thinking about it. But that seems to me to be quite a central concern there. Now, even if you take the example that you give somewhere in that paper, which you sent me, I don't know whether you read it yesterday or not.
Well, I read the slightly shorter version of it, but a lot of people were not there yesterday.
Yeah, so when you say, actually, if you take up the case of, I mean, when you're describing that a theory could be also aspirational, there are three levels at which aspiration come out in your paper, as I see. Aspiration being important for common ground. Your theory could be itself aspiration, I don't doubt it, but I would not call it a theory, but that's the reason. Aspirational theory is an aspirational theory. It's not just, we still want to know, in the absence of the aspiration being fulfilled, what is it that you're recommending? That's another point. The third point is that when something happens, how does this aspirational thing come in, characterization? And you mentioned, if I got this right, the very terrible case of Wendy Doniger's book called The Hindus, which wasn't banned, but the threat of a lawsuit made the publisher withdraw that. And you point out that a very high aspirational threshold of free speech. Now, I don't think I need to go into aspiration here. What happened is free speech was curtailed.
Yeah,
and if I'm looking at, I would like to hear you on that.
I'd like to put this in context,
but not necessarily, not necessarily this second.
The exposition correctly, but yeah.
It's just that.
I was asking the question, should thresholds be set in a culturally relative way or in a more universal way? And I simply said, I used to make a lot more concessions to local variation than I now would be prepared to do in that case. So I don't think it really bears on the issue of how aspirational the theory ought to be.
No, it's not that.
It's not the same issue that
aspirational theory was the second point. This is the third point we're discussing.
Well, but I'd like to respond to the second point, maybe, for a little while.
The second point you want,
yeah. I mean, because you talk about Rawls, but you're not talking about the theory that I had. So.
I don't mind that either, it depends on the chair.
Points one by one.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like we should focus on not on Rawls, because everyone in this audience probably has a different reading of Rawls, and it would be, I think,
but can I make my Wendy Deniger point, because that's a different point,
okay.
That's a second. Because then I come back to you, because I was in the middle of linking that.
Yeah, but I think you didn't correctly state what I was saying about that, so I wanted to do that. So what I was saying was simply that in thinking how to set the threshold, when, of course, part of my theory is the country should be writing their own constitutions in a democratic way, what should we say morally when a country builds its own cultural biases into its legal system? How far should we be judgmental of that? And I said I used to allow a lot more latitude for local specification than I now would be inclined to do in the particular case of the freedom of speech.
I was protesting as a proud Indian that we don't have to be aspirational to value free speech. free speech has been valued, one of the things for which the country fought for the independence.
There is this law on the books which she actually broke, and that it's bad law.
Listen, the book is being republished now with me on there's a long quote from me on the front cover. And this is also being published by an Indian publisher. It was a foreign publisher which actually did not fight the case. I don't think we have to say that free speech valuation is aspirational in India. The fact is that there is a valuation of free speech. Whether total free speech, even shouting that there is a fire in this hall, is permitted, these are all very difficult questions, which is one of the why I've not been very enchanted by beginning with ideal states, not ideal theory, by the way. One of the problems becomes, can I just state that and then you could disagree on that?
Yeah, I just
No,
want
can I just
to say what I actually said. It would be more useful if the audience knew what I'd actually said. What I said was that in my earlier work, I had given post-war Germany as an example where a society's particular history and the problems that it was grappling with would give it the right to have a more anti-speech, have more areas where free speech could be curtailed. The total prohibition of all anti-Semitic publication, Xeroxing, political organizing, and so on. And I said that was right for Germany, it would be wrong for the United States. And I said, now I no longer believe that a country gets off the hook by citing its own particular history.
But citing its own particular history in an entirely wrong form is wrong because the history there is wrong. That the valuation of free speech was one of the things. I've even had a book arguing that is a long tradition, not just in India, but a number of countries, not just among the Hindus and the Buddhists, but also among the Muslims. There's a long tradition. The Indian independence was fought among which free speech plays a part. I'm not trying to say what I
was talking about
It's partly a factual question about how much violation there was
I
or
don't think
wasn't.
we don't have to answer that.
What I was saying is that the experience of being involved with the Hindu right on Wendy's book taught me that I was wrong about Germany, and that it was Germany that I was making the point about. Okay?
Right, so I think I would like to come back to the question of local specification and how much of that you were
I think the simple straightforward thing is that free speech was valued enough by those who fought for independence for it to go into the Indian Constitution as one of the valuations.
Well, that's quite right, but
Amartya, you must let me finish something.
that wasn't what I was saying.
May not be every one of them, but maybe every fifth sentence.
What do you think about Germany, though? That's the question. Because I changed my mind, not about India, but about Germany. So what do you think about Germany?
I'm not talking about Germany.
No, but I was. That was my point. Yeah.
You're trying to make a point, and I'm trying to make a point. And your point may be right, but you ought to hear what my point is. And what I'm saying is that even if you have this is an analogy with the theory of justice, that even if one case is that even if you don't agree on perfect justice, you may agree that certain particular things that happen are extremely unjust, like slavery at some stage, people dying of hunger and famine, people not having medical care now, that kind of issue. Similarly, this was an egregious violation of free speech. We don't have to go into the question of what would be an ideal state of free speech to agree that this was a completely uncalled for violation against which we should fight. And I, as a citizen, have tried to fight by being a part of the republication effort. The difference is that if you are judging things by violations and injustice, this was a case of clear injustice, and one could say this without agreeing on what an aspirationally ideal theory of free speech in India or in Germany of the United States might be. The free speech will diminish. This was a decline. If you are in the business of ranking alternative, you could say that this makes us go downhill.
See, in fact, I wasn't talking about an ideal or perfect theory of free speech. I was addressing a debate, which is a very live debate in law right now, as to whether countries have the right to cite their particular problems in order to curtail free speech. And I was saying I used to think the answer to that was yes. I now think the answer to that is no, that we should hold all countries to the same standard. It was about sameness of standard, not idealness of standard.
So she's insisting on a universal standard.
A universal standard, but not a particularly transcendent or ideal standard, just a universal standard.
Debate at all.
But okay, well, I mean, that's why I think this point isn't pertinent to the
There's another issue in the background here of the standards Martha is setting for minimum justice of constitutions, constitutional guarantees, and that's a sort of practical demand. And then the local specification idea had been a way to give a pass to certain places, or just give leeway for local specification. And now she was thinking too much on this issue, and then on this issue it seems like you're converging.
I think, having a universal standard, same for all, doesn't mean it has to be particularly lofty, out of reach, ideal. None of those words were words that I was using.
Listen, you're the
chair. I think having
the chair, you decide how this should go. I could either make some point which I wanted to make, or we can go in any one of them and spend a lot of time finding out what is it that Martha was trying to say, and how Germany comes into the story.
I think the kind of project Martha's engaged in of setting...
I have the greatest respect for Martha's project. I was trying to say that capability approach allows many different projects without declaring everything else to be out of class. That's a big difference. And the whole idea that, for example, can you have a capability theorist who thinks that functioning is the right way of looking at it rather than capability, like Max Weber does? The answer is yes. It's not the one that I believe in. I make a distinction between what is the part of capability approach and what happens to be my particular preferred position in that. It's a I hate to use a religious term here, it's a broad church, and it allows many different ways of approaching capability, and capability theory has many distinctions. Now you are particularly keen on having lists then. And I'm not
because I'm interested in constitutional law, and that's my particular project.
But you have also said that I ought to have a list. I can quote you saying that.
I've said that when you give examples of things you favor, there is an implicit choice of certain things as more important than others. And
but
I think
important. That is way. And now that I was going to make these points, and this gives me a chance. Can I get just 10 minutes uninterrupted?
Well, why don't you just let him speak the rest of the time?
No,
Because he's...
I'm going to put another point on the table so that we can discuss.
But I guess what I'd like to know is if you think about the project of setting out a nation's goals in the form of a constitution, do we have any disagreement that this should be done in a rather demanding and aspirational way?
This is a complicated question. I think in general the short answer is yes, but there's a longer answer. Because there's a question...
Yes, that there's a disagreement, or yes, that it should be done that way?
For example, the amount of, to what extent you can provide full employment, for example. For many countries, you can legislate that is very important to achieve right now. For many countries, that would be completely hopeless to achieve. Similarly, the standard that everyone has a right, as Adam Smith thought, at least in some lives, with writing, for higher education. That may be a problem in a way that agreeing on everyone must have schooling is not. So there is a complication.
I mean, those were examples that I gave when I said the threshold should be set in terms of feasibility.
But I don't really, Chair, I leave it to you to decide how you want to conduct this discussion.
Well, I'd love to hear some of the other points, but can I see if there's a connection back to what you started with, which was agreed common ground, which was the motivational element of aspirations. So they're helpful in motivating people through life and can motivate people to reforms. And I just wonder, Amartya, what happens, will you, I think I know Martha's answer to this, but would you accept the same point for motivating polities or political entities to change? Because I think some of what Martha's doing is a practical project.
That is an issue in which he's very engaged, in which I'm not all that engaged. And
Yes.
I can answer questions which are very peripheral to what I was going to say.
Yes, please.
And that would be a good way of spending time. But it could be another way of spending time is those things which I think is rather important to say, rather than answering rather peripheral questions, which in this case is coming from you. May I?
Please.
So there's a distinction between capability approach and capability theory of a particular sort. And there's nothing wrong in having a very full-fledged theory and yet allow very many other things as legitimate exercises of the capability approach. It's a very big discipline. So the question, and sometimes it comes, the speech that we heard just now from the former president of Mexico, Human Development Index is also an exercise in capability. And yet, there would be many different ways of criticizing it. It serves the purpose. I think many of the applications of the capability approach are contingent on circumstance. What is the purpose of this exercise? And Mahbub Haq knew what his exercise was, why he wanted to do that. Also, what we put down as human rights thing, there will be much greater agreement on that than in the theory of justice in general, because theory of justice is not just about human rights, but even on the human rights subject, there could be disagreement on many things, that whether you can put them forward as rights that you can pursue. I think in some ways a historical contingency remains, which is not a cultural contingency, as to what can be done at this time. That I think the kind of demands on human rights that I would make if I'm talking about a rich country would be different. It's not because ultimately there's any difference between them, but because in the circumstances you can demand certain things for some people which you might not be able to demand for Ethiopia or India, not because Ethiopians have different values or culturally they are separate entities. There's also the thing that what the valuation of any particular capability is contingent on the circumstances. I happen to, because of people who would have noticed that I was homping around because of metal knees, but it's a lot better than not having knees that work at all. But I couldn't, as a result, unlike 35 years earlier in my life, couldn't run. And if I lived in a society in which tigers were quite common, I think this would be an enormous handicap. In a way, in my life of giving lectures while hobbling up there, is not. So I think there's a contingency of the importance of these things. There's also a mathematical point, that when you have a list, you have just mentioned what are these items. There's a huge question of weighting on that. Now, since Rawls did not like weighting, mostly what he did was establish geographic orders, which really means something is infinitely more important one than two, two is infinitely more important than three. But when you are dealing with a deprived society, there are very hard choices that you have to make without giving up at all. And I do agree with you. The aspiration of having the bigger things, having all, must remain and is very important. And in the context of human rights, and you very kindly quoted me from there, that the fact that a right is not immediately fulfillable does not mean that it's not a right, it just is an unfulfilled right. So there's a distinction as to what could be demanded and what could be fulfilled then. And then beyond going to human rights, what are the other issues of the theory of justice that we have to address? So I think
Which are those other issues? Could you spell that out? Because the part of the theory of justice that I view myself as taking on is the part that coincides pretty completely with the human rights, if we include social and economic rights. Of course, I mean, I agree. There are other topics like political structure that I've never addressed, and that's certainly a gap. But what were the other things that you were thinking about?
well, we have disagreement which are not necessarily connected with culture. You know, I think one of the things I do object to is not the new, but generally, is to assume that somehow the difference between, say, the Indians and the Chinese and the Americans would be greater when it comes to these values than the difference between Donald Trump and even Hillary Clinton will do for this purpose, try to go far. And I think there are big differences that we do have, and we could debate on that, even on human rights, to what extent. I mean, there are all kinds of questions that people's tastes differ. And when I was having a major operation, I was disturbed by the fact that people who were trying to control me tried to prevent me from trying to finish the paper I was doing. I was just going to go on the sedation. That seemed to me the best way of spending time into the sedation. I know others who don't like it, so when I don't see that, look, why don't you write a paper? Instead, I think that it's a good time to chat. So I think we come in many shapes and sizes, we have different preferences, we attach different, very important to the eccentricity of our taste. I have a huge tolerance of that. And I can see that we could have many kind of debate when intervention would be justified, when it would not be. And the theory of justice is concerned with it in a very broad way, even when certain things, having put free speech in it, but also basic subsistence, medical care, not being enslaved and so on, would be a kind of core value on which I would expect everyone to agree, and it being feasible also for most places. And those who are not feasible, they should be right as something which we would like to do, and because that also directs our thinking. So I think if we are going to go into where exactly our disagreement lies, there is a complex picture. It won't be anything as simple as what we began with in the context.
But I think, you know,
no, can I just
bear in mind that the part of the theory of justice that I've taken on, and I always say it's a partial theory of justice, is just the part that overlaps with the international human rights movement. Now, I think of it in domestic constitutional terms, partly because I do think that the citizens of a nation have the right to decide which norms to put in their constitutions, and the international human rights and norms should not be dictatorial. They should be enabling of that constitution-making process. But in any case, the content is pretty much the same. So I think what you say about human rights seems to me so congenial and so completely in sync with what I think that I can't quite see on that part of the theory of justice where the difference lies. Maybe there are other parts which I haven't addressed where we would find the differences.
I think, first of all, I think the theory of justice is much wider engagement than a theory of human rights.
Well, but I'm talking about, I don't ever claim that I have a complete theory of justice. I have a partial theory, and it's just this part, this little slice. I think it's a big slice. It's a pretty huge slice. But, you know, what I'm saying is that I think if we approach some other part, we might turn out to have